Over 235,000 Canadians are homeless right now. But what if quiet 2025 laws could make you the next statistic? Not for missing payments, but for regulations you never saw coming? While most Canadians worry about interest rates and inflation, a web of provincial and federal housing laws is silently tightening around homeowners and renters alike. These aren't distant policy debates. They're active changes happening right now that could cost you your home within months, even if you've done everything right. Provincial rent control rollbacks. In boardrooms across Canada, provincial governments are quietly erasing decades of tenant protection with the stroke of a pen. What used to be your legal right to reasonable rent increases is disappearing faster than most renters realize. Ontario led the charge in November 2024 with Bill 97, permanently exempting all new construction from rent control. That means any building completed after 2018 can now raise your rent by any amount at any time with just 90 days' notice. For the 1.2 million Ontarians living in these newer units, a $1,800 apartment could legally become $2,500 overnight. But Ontario isn't alone. British Columbia expanded its vacancy decontrol rules in January 2025, allowing landlords to reset rent to market rates between tenants for any unit built after 2018. The province claims this encourages new construction, but rental availability has actually dropped 15% since implementation as landlords deliberately evict tenants to capture higher rents. Alberta took the most dramatic step, eliminating all rent control caps for new tenancies starting March 2025. In Calgary alone, new lease rates have jumped an average of 35% compared to renewal rates for existing tenants. Edmonton is seeing similar spikes of 28% to 42%. The numbers are staggering. Across controlled units that have turned over in 2025, average rent increases range from 25% in smaller cities to 40% in Toronto and Vancouver. That's not gradual housing inflation. That's financial shock therapy for Canadian renters. Even if you're safely locked into an older, rent-controlled unit today, these changes are shrinking the rental market around you. When your lease ends or life forces you to move, you'll face a world where tenant protections have largely vanished. While provinces strip away rent protections, federal tax changes are making homeownership even more impossible. Mortgage stress test tightening. The federal government's latest mortgage rules aren't just making it harder to buy a home. They're making it impossible for current homeowners to keep the ones they have. Starting April 2025, Canada's mortgage stress test rate jumps from 5.25% to 7.25%. That might sound like bureaucratic fine-tuning, but it's actually a financial earthquake. When your mortgage comes up for renewal, you'll need to prove you can afford payments at that higher rate, even if your actual rate is much lower. Here's the reality check. An estimated 180,000 Canadian homeowners won't qualify under the new rules when their mortgages renew over the next 18 months. These aren't people who've missed payments or fallen behind. They're homeowners who qualified just fine 3 to 5 years ago, but can't meet today's tougher standards on the same property. The Bank of Canada's own analysis projects forced sales will increase by 35% in 2025 as homeowners face renewal rejection. British Columbia and Ontario will see the heaviest impact, with Metro Vancouver expecting 12,000 forced sales and the Greater Toronto Area bracing for 18,500. Consider this scenario. You bought a $650,000 home in Mississauga in 2020 with a $520,000 mortgage. Your payment was manageable at 2.8%, but when renewal time comes, you need to qualify at 7.25% on your remaining $475,000 balance. If your income hasn't increased proportionally, you're facing potential foreclosure despite never missing a payment. The stress test was designed to prevent overextension, but it's now creating a different crisis: displacement of responsible homeowners who simply can't navigate changing government standards. Even if you survive the mortgage changes, new property tax assessments are creating another financial trap. Municipal property tax reassessment surge. Municipal governments across Canada are conducting the largest property reassessment wave in decades, and the tax bills arriving in mailboxes are forcing longtime homeowners to sell properties they've owned for years. Toronto's 2025 reassessment hit homeowners with an average annual increase of $2,800. But that's just the beginning. Properties in formerly affordable neighborhoods like Leslieville and Junction Triangle saw increases of $4,200 to $6,800 annually as gentrification pushed assessments through the roof. Vancouver dropped its luxury tax threshold from $3 million to $2 million in January 2025, immediately capturing 23,000 additional properties. Homeowners in East Vancouver who bought modest homes for $400,000 in 2010 now face luxury tax bills on properties assessed at $2.2 million, despite never moving or improving their homes. The crisis extends far beyond major cities. Rural communities from Nova Scotia's South Shore to Alberta's Peace River region are seeing assessment increases of 45% as urban refugees drove up property values during the pandemic. In Wolfville, Nova Scotia, seniors on fixed incomes received tax bills that jumped from $2,100 to $3,800 annually. The Municipal Property Assessment Corporation reports that 87,000 Canadian seniors are now spending more than 35% of their income on property taxes alone. Many are being forced to sell homes they've owned for 20 to 40 years simply to cover municipal tax obligations. This isn't just about higher bills, it's about generational displacement. Families who built communities are being priced out by their own municipal governments through assessments based on theoretical market values they never intended to realize. Property taxes aren't the only municipal costs spiraling. New utility connection fees are pricing out entire communities. Infrastructure levy expansion. Beyond property taxes, Canadian municipalities are unleashing a barrage of new fees and levies that can add tens of thousands to your housing costs with little warning or explanation. Development cost charges have surged 60% across major cities in 2025. Calgary's new fees add $18,000 to every new home, while Ottawa's charges jump to $22,000 per unit. These aren't just affecting new buyers. When developers can't absorb the costs, existing homeowners face special assessments to cover infrastructure upgrades in their neighborhoods. The newest threat comes wrapped in environmental language: climate resilience fees. Edmonton introduced a mandatory $8,500 climate adaptation levy for all properties in flood-prone areas, while Halifax coastal properties face $12,000 to $15,000 in sea level rise mitigation fees. These charges appear on your tax bill with 30 days to pay in full. What's particularly shocking is how small municipalities are copying big city fee structures. Towns like Canmore, Alberta, and Blue Mountains, Ontario, now charge development fees comparable to Toronto or Vancouver. Canmore's new infrastructure levy adds $14,500 to every housing transaction, pricing out the service workers who keep the town running. Perhaps most dangerous are retroactive infrastructure levies hitting existing properties. Regina homeowners received surprise bills of $3,200 to $7,800 to upgrade water systems they never knew needed fixing. The city gave residents 90 days to pay or face tax sale proceedings. These aren't one-time expenses, they're the new normal. Municipal budget shortfalls are driving creative fee structures that treat homeowners as unlimited funding sources for infrastructure problems decades in the making. While municipalities grab more money, landlord licensing schemes are shrinking the rental supply. Landlord registration and licensing mandates. Across Canada, new landlord licensing schemes are pushing small-scale property owners out of the rental market just when housing supply is desperately needed most. Hamilton's mandatory licensing program charges $1,850 per unit annually, plus $400 for each required inspection. For a landlord with 3 rental units, that's over $6,000 in fees before covering any actual property costs. London, Ontario's program costs $1,200 per unit with additional charges for fire safety inspections, electrical certifications, and annual compliance reviews. The bureaucratic burden extends far beyond fees. Landlords must now navigate complex application processes, maintain detailed maintenance logs, and submit to unscheduled inspections that can result in immediate rental suspension orders. In Kitchener, the licensing process requires 14 separate forms and can take up to 8 months for approval. A recent Ontario Landlord Association survey found that 25% of small landlords with fewer than 5 properties plan to sell rather than comply with licensing requirements. In Hamilton alone, 1,800 rental units have been removed from the market since licensing began in September 2024. The unintended consequence is obvious. Reduced rental supply is driving up rents faster than any market force. Licensed municipalities are seeing rental availability drop 18% to 35%, while neighboring unlicensed areas experience price surges from displaced demand. Small landlords who bought rental properties for retirement income or to help adult children afford housing are being regulated out of existence. The mom-and-pop landlords who often provided more flexible, affordable rentals are disappearing, leaving the market to large corporate players who can absorb compliance costs. The landlords who remain are getting powerful new tools to remove tenants quickly: accelerated eviction procedures. The landlords who survived licensing requirements now have streamlined eviction powers that can remove tenants faster than ever before, often before tenants understand what's happening. Ontario's Bill 184 reduced renovation eviction notices from 60 to 30 days, cutting tenant preparation time in half. Landlords can now serve 13 NARA notices claiming major renovations with minimal documentation, and tenants have just 1 month to find alternative housing or challenge the eviction. The Landlord and Tenant Board processed 23,000 renovation evictions in 2024, a 67% increase from 2023. British Columbia introduced strict penalties for bad faith evictions, but enforcement remains virtually non-existent. Despite 4,200 reported cases of landlords failing to complete claim renovations or move in family members, only 18 penalties were issued in 2024. The average fine of $1,800 is far less than the profit from converting to higher rent units. Digital-only notice systems are creating a two-tier eviction process. Landlords can now serve notices through email and text messaging, but many vulnerable tenants, seniors, newcomers, and low-income renters, miss critical deadlines because they lack reliable internet access or don't understand the legal significance of digital communications. Legal aid funding cuts compound the problem. Ontario reduced tenant legal aid by 22% in 2024, leaving most tenants to navigate complex eviction proceedings alone. The average time to secure legal representation increased from 8 days to 24 days, often too late to file effective challenges. In practical terms, a renovation eviction that once took 4 to 6 months now takes 6 to 8 weeks with minimal tenant recourse. Even tenants who avoid eviction face new restrictions on where they can live. Zoning bylaw enforcement crackdowns. Municipal governments are launching aggressive enforcement campaigns against shared housing arrangements that have quietly housed thousands of Canadians for decades, turning previously tolerated living situations into criminal violations overnight. Mississauga's bylaw enforcement team conducted 847 surprise inspections in 2024, targeting basement apartments and converted garages. Properties found in violation face immediate occupancy orders, forcing tenants out within 72 hours regardless of lease agreements. The city removed 312 basement suites from the housing market, displacing over 800 residents. Maximum occupancy rules are being weaponized against international students and newcomers who share housing to afford Canadian rents. Burnaby's 1+1 rule limits occupancy to 1 person per bedroom, plus 1 additional person total, making typical student house sharing illegal. Bylaw officers now work with police to conduct evening raids, issuing $500 fines to each excess occupant. Parking requirements have become the newest tool for eliminating affordable units. Richmond Hill requires 2 parking spaces per unit, forcing landlords to convert parking areas back from housing. The municipality eliminated 156 secondary suites in 2024 solely due to parking violations, even in areas well served by public transit. These enforcement campaigns disproportionately target the most vulnerable renters, those who can't afford market-rate apartments but aren't eligible for subsidized housing. Multi-generational families cramped into single-family homes face prosecution for violating occupancy limits that assume nuclear family structures. The human cost is immediate: families split up, students forced into homelessness, and seniors losing basement rental income they depend on for property tax payments. While local laws restrict housing options, federal immigration policies are increasing demand pressure. Immigration housing requirements. Ottawa's new immigration housing requirements are creating artificial demand spikes that distort housing markets before newcomers even arrive in Canada, while simultaneously making immigration itself dependent on an already broken housing system. Starting in March 2025, all new permanent residents must provide proof of a signed 6-month lease before receiving final immigration approval. This seemingly reasonable requirement has created a predatory market where landlords charge premium rents to desperate applicants who must secure housing sight unseen from overseas. Toronto landlords report receiving $500 to $1,000 application fees just to hold units for immigration purposes. Student visa renewals now require annual housing verification, forcing international students to commit to expensive 12-month leases, even for 8-month academic programs. Universities report that 23% of international students are considering leaving Canada due to housing requirements they cannot meet while studying full-time. Investor visa programs continue inflating prices in target cities. Quebec's investor program brought 2,847 wealthy immigrants to Montreal in 2024, each required to invest $1.2 million minimum. Average home prices in preferred investor neighborhoods jumped 28% as wealthy newcomers bid against established residents. Provincial nominee programs are concentrating populations in specific markets, overwhelming local housing supplies. New Brunswick's nominee program brought 4,200 new residents to Moncton alone, a city with just 600 rental vacancies. Similar concentration effects are hitting Saskatoon, Halifax, and Winnipeg as provincial programs channel immigrants to predetermined locations. The result is an immigration system that requires housing access to gain entry, while simultaneously making housing access more difficult for everyone. Immigration pressures are compounded by new foreign buyer restrictions that may backfire. Foreign buyer tax expansions. Canada's expanding web of foreign buyer taxes, designed to cool overheated housing markets, is instead creating a patchwork of unintended consequences that may be making housing less affordable for the very Canadians they were meant to protect. The federal foreign buyer tax expanded in January 2025 to cover commercial properties, vacant land, and recreational properties, not just residential homes. This means foreign buyers now pay an additional 20% tax on everything from cottage lots in Muskoka to small apartment buildings in Halifax. While this sounds protective, it's pushing foreign investment into exempt categories and smaller communities that lack tax coverage. Provincial tax variations have created cross-border shopping within Canada itself. Ontario's 25% tax sends buyers to Quebec, where the rate is 20%, while BC's 20% rate looks attractive compared to both. The result? Artificial demand spikes in lower tax provinces that overwhelm local markets unprepared for sudden investor attention. International students and temporary workers are getting caught in foreign buyer definitions despite living and working in Canada for years. A student who's been in Toronto for 3 years still pays the foreign buyer tax when purchasing their first home, even though they're planning permanent residency. Market distortions are pushing both foreign and domestic buyers to smaller communities without foreign buyer taxes. Towns like Collingwood, Ontario, and Canmore, Alberta, are experiencing Vancouver-level price increases as buyers seek tax-free alternatives, pricing out local workers and retirees. The taxes meant to protect Canadian housing markets are creating new pressure points that may ultimately hurt more Canadians than they help. All these pressures converge in the final threat: changes to bankruptcy and debt protection laws. Homestead exemption reductions. Canada's bankruptcy laws once protected your home from creditors, but 2025 changes have quietly turned your primary residence into fair game for debt collectors, even when you've never missed a mortgage payment. Federal homestead exemption amounts remain frozen at levels set in 2009, while housing values have tripled in many markets. The $40,000 exemption that once protected modest homes now covers barely 2% of average property values in Toronto or Vancouver. This means bankruptcy trustees can force the sale of your home to pay unsecured debts like credit cards or student loans. Provincial variations create disturbing inequality in debt protection. Alberta homeowners can protect up to $40,000 in home equity, while Prince Edward Island residents get just $8,000. If you move provinces and later face bankruptcy, your previous home protection vanishes under your new province's lower limits. Credit card and student loan debt, once considered unsecured and separate from housing, can now trigger home sales in bankruptcy proceedings. The Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy reports that 12,000 Canadians lost their homes to unsecured debt collection in 2024, an 89% increase from 2019. Seniors face particular vulnerability through predatory reverse mortgages that accumulate compound interest faster than many realize. When seniors can no longer afford property taxes or maintenance, reverse mortgage lenders can force immediate repayment through home sales, leaving elderly homeowners with nothing. These changes mean your home is no longer the protected foundation of financial security it once was. It's become another asset creditors can seize when other debts spiral beyond control. The convergence of all these 2025 housing law changes creates a perfect storm where Canadians face displacement from multiple directions simultaneously, often before they understand what's happening.